Hey, friends, picture this for a second. A moment in your life when everything feels like it's shattering, like a mirror smashed into pieces, shards scattering everywhere, and you're just standing there, helpless, with no idea how to put it back together. Have any of you ever been in that place? I have. I used to think life was just a string of okay days until it shoved me into corners I never wanted to face. Maybe you've wondered, why am I here? Is there a way out? I used to believe that only when everything fell apart, when I lost it all and hit rock bottom, would I finally turn to God, like He was my last lifeline. But today, I want to tell you a different story. What if brokenness isn't a curse, but a door to a love greater than anything you've ever dreamed of? Don't tune out now, because I'm going to take you through my journey and the real stories of people I've met. People who found light in their darkness. I promise you, by the time we reach the end of this, you'll see the broken pieces of your own life in a whole new way. Middle, main content, and specific stories. Narrative tone, natural and emotional, with vivid details. Let's start with how I used to get brokenness all wrong. I thought it was when life threw heavy punches at you, like losing your job, losing someone you love, or a failure so big it haunts you forever. You know how it is, right? Society tells us that only when we hit the bottom do we look up and call out to God. I used to think that's how it worked, like it's some kind of tough lesson you have to endure. But I was wrong. Brokenness isn't an accident you sit around waiting for, like a storm that sweeps in out of nowhere. It's deeper than that. It's a journey inside yourself, a moment when you face who you really are, not to beat yourself up, but to see how small you are compared to something so much bigger. Take my friend Hung, for example. Hung was this talented engineer, working at a big company, living what looked like the perfect life. But then his company went bankrupt. He lost his job, his reputation, everything he'd built. He told me he thought that was the brokenness people talk about, like life had forced him to his knees to beg God for help. For months, Hung drowned himself in alcohol and self-pity. But one day, sitting in his empty apartment, he realized the real problem wasn't losing his job. It was his proud heart, the part of him that believed he could handle everything on his own, no help needed, not even from God. Hung's true brokenness didn't come from that outward failure. It came when he looked inside and said, "I've been wrong. I need something, someone bigger than me." So what's brokenness really about? I think it's not just about the pain you feel on the surface. It's when you stand in front of this invisible mirror, the mirror of truth, and see how weak, flawed, and small you are next to God's endless love. It's not despair, it's an awakening. I once heard someone say that brokenness is when you realize your sins aren't just personal slip-ups. They're wounds to the one who loves you most. I think that's spot on, but I'd add this. It's when you stop running and let your heart crack open. Let me tell you about a girl I met at a prayer group. Mai grew up in a broken home. Her parents split when she was little. She spent her life trying to prove her worth with perfect grades, then great jobs. But one night, alone in her tiny rented room, she broke down crying. It wasn't because she'd failed. Actually, she was doing really well. It was because she saw how long she'd been living a lie, trying to please everyone else instead of chasing something real. She told me she felt like a voice whispered, "You don't have to pretend anymore. I've always been here." Mai's brokenness didn't come from loss. It came when she realized God loved her even when she couldn't love herself. And here's another thing I've learned. True brokenness is when you let go of what you've been clinging to, pride, self-reliance, all the fleeting stuff of this world, and grab hold of God's love instead. I think it's a life-changing moment, when you don't want to live just for yourself anymore. Someone once said it comes from seeing what Jesus did on the cross, and I believe that's true. When you get that He suffered for you, you can't keep living the same old way. I'll never forget Fong's story. He's a guy I met at a sharing event. Phong was a successful businessman, raking in millions, living in a fancy apartment with a luxury car. But then he found out he had terminal cancer. Can you imagine? All the money, the status, none of it brought him peace as he lay in that hospital bed. One night, he picked up a Bible a friend had left behind. He read about Jesus on the cross, and he cried, not because he was afraid to die, but because he saw how much time he'd wasted chasing things that didn't matter. Phong told me, for the first time, I felt alive when I knelt and said, Lord, I need you. His surrender didn't come from the cancer. It came from a love so big he couldn't ignore it. And here's the final piece. Brokenness isn't the end. It's the start of healing, of meaning. When you see that your mistakes don't just hurt you, but they hurt God's heart, and yet He still loves you, you find a peace nothing else can give. I believe that's when you start living for something bigger, not to prove anything, but to love and reflect that love to the world. Think about Lon, a single mom I met at a worship night. Her husband walked out when her kid was little, leaving her with pain and a sense of worthlessness. She used to think she didn't deserve anyone's love, not even God's. But one time, standing in church, hearing a song about forgiveness, she dropped to her knees and sobbed. She told me it felt like a weight lifted off her shoulders. For the first time, she gave God her pain and said, I don't know where to start, but I trust you. From then on, Lon changed. She stopped living to prove she was strong and started loving her kid and helping others, mirroring the love she'd been given. Closing, wrapping up with a lesson. Gentle, inspiring tone, encouraging action. So, friends, after hearing about Hung, Mai, Phong, and Lon, I want you to pause for a second. Ask yourself, what's the brokenness in my life? Maybe it's a big failure, a relationship that fell apart, or just an emptiness you can't name. But today, I want you to know this. Brokenness isn't something to fear. It's an invitation from God, a call to let go of what's holding you back and step into His love. The biggest lesson I've learned is this. When you offer God your broken heart, He never turns you away. He'll heal you, transform you, and lead you to a life fuller than you ever imagined. Here's something I'd love for you to try right now. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and whisper to yourself, Lord, I need you. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have it all figured out. All you need is a willing heart, and He'll take care of the rest. I believe your journey, wherever you are, can become another beautiful story, just like the ones I've shared today.